the curious part of that is censorship and the various forms of censorship that exist. People might want to see this movie, but they can't because maybe it's not showing up in search results or whatever else. But also, it's 2 hours long. You know, it is a difficult watch. It reminds us all of a period of time that I think most people just want to forget. So, as a storyteller, it's my job to try to do this in a way that keeps people engaged. And, you know, maybe I've failed a little bit at that. But, you know, I've actually spent a little time recently trying to understand why the left seemed to be more penetrable by this. It's kind of evil. I don't know how to say it. What I've seen, it is almost like an evil force that is behind it. Now you can semantically say, well, it's not evil. It's just, you know, mass formation, psychosis, or we can put all these fancy names on it. Whatever you want to do, whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But I think in part because the party had a hubris, it was a blind spot. We are the party of inclusion, right? Everyone can be part of us. And then the caveat there is if you give us a lot of money. And that's what people like Sam Bankman-Fried did. You know, he brought in tons of cash, and
Yeah.
you know, there's a significant concern with where Act Blue is getting their money. We don't have agencies now agencies that were supposed to investigate. They're not doing it. I called the FEC and I asked them about it, and they seemed very skeptical about any of the concepts of straw donors and things like that. But anyone can look it up and
A
see
lot of
that,
it's kind of
hey,
a just. Today's the 25th of September, 2024, and I'm honored to have John Davidson with me. He is the author, producer, star, in a sense, along with some white knights and, darker colored combatants in the Epidemic of Fraud, the story of hydroxychloroquine and how it was prevented from even being given a valid trial during the COVID era. So, John, tell us a little about yourself, how you became interested in this topic, and how, I guess, moreover, you garnered the interest, momentum, and thrust to produce this.
good morning, Dr. Bach. Thank you for having me. So I've spent the last 25 years or so in Hollywood, working for the television studios and networks. And part of that was providing marketing services for these organizations. So I would make movie trailers. I did some special effects for shows like Big Bang Theory. I had a pretty great career, and then in 2020, it's as much a spiritual journey as it is a psychological one or a mental one. I began to be very concerned about this COVID thing coming very early, before even most doctors that I knew. And as such, I had my company ready for lockdowns before anyone even knew that this disease, or whatever you want to call it, because, you know, you can call it a disease and people get upset. COVID isn't real, or
We'll go with
whatever.
phenomenon.
Yeah, it definitely was a agent of change, whatever it was. And anyway, I was ready to go. So we did some of the earliest stay home campaigns, telling you to literally hashtag stay home. And then as I was monitoring everything, I was very obsessed with it. It was almost like I was pushed to do it, right? And then I noticed that clinical trials were faked. And then the coverage of those fake studies vanished. Like no one was pursuing it. Now, granted, you had other news things occurring at the time, like George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, all that stuff. But this in the medical community, I truly expected a significant backlash against the author of the study that said hydroxychloroquine was, deadly, and there wasn't any at all. I was the lone voice on Twitter, saying, "What in the heck is going on here?" And also I watched all of these doctors who said you couldn't go to church, couldn't do all these other things, suddenly do an about face and say, "But protesting is acceptable." Where you're,
I'm going to break in slightly. I apologize, but if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all.
Brilliant, yeah.
That goes a fair amount for Hollywood as well. It's interesting that you kind of, I guess, were on the opposite camp to begin with, and then your eyes open. The thing that puzzled me with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin as well is that both these medications are FDA approved.
Right.
So ipso facto and ab initio, to use more Latin, they are safe and effective for whatever they were geared to be effective for. But at baseline, they are determined to be safe enough. Obviously, with every medication, there's always a risk benefit calculation to be made. So even if aspirin is clearly out on the shelf, over the counter, Tylenol can cause kidney problems. Aspirin can cause Ray's syndrome or ulcer. You don't want to take these medications indiscriminately, but every single thing that's out there has some risk. And then the question is, is it going to give you a benefit? Well, you have a bad enough headache, you take the aspirin, Tylenol, whatever it is, and people make this equation all the time. And clearly, somehow this was taken out of the hands of the people with hydroxychloroquine, which I don't personally take on a regular basis. There are versions of it similarly, similar medication like Plaquenil and whatnot, which people take, but they need a situation, psoriasis, or quinine was given for malaria, malaria prophylaxis, I guess. So if you're not in those situations, you don't want to take it. But here, on one hand, we're being told this is big, bad, horrible, catastrophic phenomenon. Potential, Chinese bioweapon on one level, or a bad flu without a flu shot. And here we have a medication that's, deemed safe enough to take for malaria prophylaxis. You don't even have the illness, and you should be taking quinine, which is, related to hydroxychloroquine. And ivermectin, ditto. It's good enough to take if you have certain type of parasites, and whether you're horse or human, mind you. And lo and behold, this is not something that's taken off the table, being completely unsafe, and for specific animals, not humans, as if their biology is so vastly different from our own. All the studies we ever do for medications, they have mouse studies. Right. So when we deem if something's safe enough for mouse to take, we take. If something is good enough for horse, conversely, it should be good enough for us to take. So I apologize for that little discourse, but that's kind of my feeling about it. And one additional point, I guess, is that during the Trump era, I think in 2018, they had this bill literally called the Right to Try bill. And it was very much analogous to this. It was deemed for cancer patients. Back in I think the 70s, there was the Laetrile, kind of episode. You're probably too young to remember this, but it's derived from apricot seeds, and it's kind of a poison. On the other hand, people with cancers, they wanted to get this medication because nothing else was working, and they wound up going to Mexico, Tijuana, and places like that to find Laetrile. And the question is, who knows? If you're going to die, in 3 months anyway, you theoretically should be able to try almost anything, frankly. Sure. And so that was the essence of the Right to Try bill, where they're going to take experimental medications and kind of put them in the boxing ring of issues and patients who have either orphaned diseases or that is the disease for which there's no medications, and or terminal illness and so forth. So literally, and that passed by Congress, I think, overwhelmingly, the right to try. And then a mere 2 years later, no more right to try, when we're having this theoretically, again, if it's so catastrophic an illness, you should be able to try almost anything, grab anything off the shelf.
Sure.
And anyway, so that's the end of my diatribe. So what kind of, no pun intended, what brought your come to Jesus moment as far as this goes? I know that you are a Christian, and I think that kind of informs your work and your mission. as far as producing this work goes, and I appreciate the bravery that's inherent in that. So tell us a little bit about the pathway, about why this became an issue that you had to, on which you had to speak.
So Jesus was my come to Jesus. No, but so I did this work, and I initially just started trying to find more information out. Right, when I saw this. Sorry, did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. You're just wrapped with attention.
Yes, this is my resting listening phase.
So anyway, I saw an article by Harvey Yale, I think, in Newsweek, and I read it, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this drug a second chance.
Harvey Risch.
Harvey Risch at Yale, yeah, Dr.
Yeah.
Harvey Risch, and so I saw what he wrote, and I said, okay, but between this and the obvious shenanigans around the studies, I'm going to look at this more. And I offered to help, and then I was put into contact with some other doctors, and began to just try to figure out how to break through the mass media reporting on this. Because I would look at like an interview that CNN did, which with Dr. Risch, which was a hit piece. Really, they just fully attacked him and attacked his ideas in a way that I was kind of shocked. And now, another thing to come in and to keep in mind too is that I had started my career at CNN 25, 30 years ago in '97, and I had over the since maybe Obama took office, something went wrong in the news, and I just couldn't watch it anymore. The vitriol was just so extreme on any side that it was disgusting to me. So I tuned out. I went into my life. I had a business. I had a family. I was very busy with my creative work. So why get involved? So then I come back out into 2020, and I'm like, the news is wrong on almost everything. And it's so consistent, you almost think it has to be on purpose. So I here I am now, in a garage basically, trying to figure out how to fight against a $1 trillion media industry that is all set to self-destruct. But that's what I did. And the early attempts were to just take things that existed and sort of maybe change the lower fifths to put truth under there. Like when Harvey's being attacked by John Berman at CNN, I point out how much money that the networks get from pharmaceutical companies. But that was an early attempt. It wasn't enough. I realized I was going to have to really hit people over the head. So then I made a early version of the documentary, which sort of grew out of that one interview with John Berman. And the early version of the documentary was about 45 minutes long, but I missed a lot. And the only way I knew that I missed a lot was because after January 2021, I said, okay, there's too much craziness here. I may be wrong about a few things. I want to take this offline. I was already being censored as it was, like only 30 people saw it. So I took it offline, but I was also anonymous, and I just sort of walked the earth, so to speak, for about a year and a half, and traveled with my family. And everywhere I went, it was almost like I was being forced to see new things that were going wrong now. The vaccine issues. People were complaining about COVID vaccines. And I was trying to tune that out too. I said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm not going to get involved. You do your own homework. In my opinion, it seems a little rushed. And that was what I would say if anybody asked me, my neighbors or whatever else. But as I went through, like I go to take a road trip with a family in June 2021. We went to a Walgreens, and I normally keep my headphones in because I don't want to hear anything else. I was totally in tune-out mode. I take them out for a second, and I hear an old man shouting at the pharmacy, "I was healthy as an ox till I got that damn COVID shot." I'm like, not listening, Jesus. So, but I heard these things, and they all left sort of a little impression everywhere I went. Then I started discovering, stories like Ernesto Ramirez and whatever. But by the end of 2021, I said, okay, I'm back in this fight, and you know, for me, I feel that it's better not to focus on the intricacies of medicine because I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a researcher in terms of medical research. It's more important to just focus on the smoke and mirrors for me, because that is my domain, right? You know, Magic Feather Inc. is my company, and I could see that there was a lot of public manipulation and propaganda, and that's something that I try to point out, and that's become an overarching point in the film. That you see manipulation of how people are being swayed. Maybe their political views are being used to discredit this drug. Maybe their just personal hatred of Donald Trump is being used to associate him with this drug. And that's why in the film Donald Trump never says a word, because he was a polarizing figure, and I didn't want to turn people's brains off as soon as they hear him speak. Does that make sense? So
No, absolutely. No, you're trying to keep the focus on the focus.
Right.
You know, it's like
let them hang themselves with their words.
People have their kind of semi. We like to think we're rational. We're not quite computer chips, but we tend to be more rational when we're not clouded by emotion. You know, you can kind of talk with somebody about whether, I don't know, he's speeding or you know, whether his car is has a dent on it, but you start bringing in his mother or you know, insult his dog, whatever, then things, you know, people can't see anything. They just see only one color. They see red. So I think it's reasonable to take that kind of factor out of it and, you know, kind of de-inflame the situation and get kind of a rational approach. But that being said, there was a fair amount of politics involved. There were politics. And, you know, I think things fell, you know, there's an old joke. There's two categories of people who fall into categories and people who don't fall into categories. So I think that the category of people who were really pushing this fall into the category, people who fall into the category of, you know, pharma adjacent or pharma benefiting.
And that's something that, you know, when I really started to learn about the medical industry, the FDA, the government agencies, and everything else, it was pretty obvious that, I mean, they were completely captured, without a shadow of a doubt. Like, to find anyone with a fully objective mind in this realm was almost impossible, and if they existed, they would be tossed out by the FDA.
Yeah, you know, it's a funny thing. You know, I think your movie, I'll maybe pop it up in a minute in the background, but your movie, Epidemic of Fraud, points out, I've written a few articles for Brownstone on Dr. Fauci, but you at one point, you know, have the video clips. I mean, it's just amazing. I can kind of see, I grew up in the, you know, say, you know, 1960s, my childhood and whatnot. And I get it. People could say things and then they could unsay them, as it were, because there was very little way of kind of accumulating the background data to prove them wrong. And so the news, you know, CBS and ABC, they owned their reels and they didn't necessarily lend them out. And if nobody had any way of recording them as it kind of was broadcast, and so it was broadcast once and disappeared, a little bit like pollen or something like that. It was spewed and then it was disappeared. But you know, he's like, I'll do my Dr. Fauci. You know, I didn't say I was strongly on one side or the other as far as this issue goes. And then it comes back. You have him, you know, say, I strongly think it's Wuhan. You know, I strongly think it's whatever is a natural occurrence. I strongly, you know, don't think it's the Wuhan leak. I strongly, you know, you just have his quote right in front of him. And
he couldn't have written that better. Honestly, it was the most brilliant compilation of contradictions where he exactly says the words that he says he didn't say.
Yeah, he says strongly over and over again. I can't pull that clip right up, but I do commend and recommend people watch the movie. I got to tell you, my little trick is I for these things, for documentaries, I tend to put the captions on and run them pretty fast. So it's a 2-hour movie, and I'm sure it's great in the movies theaters. I don't quite have that time, but I
Of
watched in about
course.
45 minutes. But it comes across excellently then, and the captions are there. A lot of it's readable, and I would stop the screen whenever I felt like it. So on the computer, it's excellent. And I actually took some screen captures. I didn't apply them, but there's just that one scene where he's like, I didn't strongly come down one way or another. Well, of course you did, dude. And people can follow up some of this on my if they follow my name here, whoops, on the other side, and go to brownstone.org. I've got 2 articles on Dr. Fauci. It's Dr. Fauci's own gain of function, how he personally, oddly enough, self-aggrandized. He had a gain of function way we make these viruses stronger. He made himself stronger through some gain of function process, which is really inimical with the whole, stated journalistic intent, which is to, what is it? I always get it backwards. I mean, benefit the afflicted and afflict the benefited, something like that.
Right.
The idea of the journalist is to go after the classes that are kind of cushy and kind of enjoying something and possibly illicitly, and bring them down to earth. They kind of the experiment of the 1960s, or I guess a lot of people, the baby boomers who ran journalism, they all kind of saw themselves as countercultural, and they kind of fall in love with the 1960s. They see themselves as the man, and they're going against the man. When a little bit of virus came along, they were all pro pharma. They were all pro
Instant. It was unbelievable.
They were locking everybody down, the most authoritarian. These are the people when I grew up, that they were horrified that Salvador Allende was, helicoptered out by General Pinochet in Chile, and that, and they worked to kind of neuter the CIA so we would never be complicit in anything like that again. And so they're all anti-authoritarian, as it were, and yet they were the most pro-authoritarian. It was, across the board. There's pretty much more on the left than the right. And the left ostensibly was the one that's kind of against the government, because they never trusted the government. Well, now they are the government, and not only do they trust, but they pretty much submit.
I've never seen anything like it. I've actually spent a little time recently trying to understand why the left seemed to be more penetrable by this. It's kind of evil. I don't know how to say it. What I've seen, it is almost like an evil force that is behind it. Now you can semantically say, well, it's not evil. It's just mass formation, psychosis, or we can put all these fancy names on it. Whatever you want to do, whatever makes you feel comfortable. But I think in part because the party had a hubris, it was a blind spot. We are the party of inclusion, right? Everyone can be part of us, and then the caveat there is if you give us a lot of money, and that's what people like Sam Bankman-Fried did. He brought in tons of cash, and there's a significant concern with where ActBlue is getting their money. We don't have agencies now that were supposed to investigate. They're not doing it. I called the FEC and I asked them about it, and they seemed very skeptical about any of the concepts of straw donors and things like that. But anyone can look it up.
A lot of it's kind of just a rolling Ponzi scheme. When Ponzi did it, it was fraud. When the government does it, or government adjacent people, then it's kind of doing business. Yeah, invariably there's just going to be a lot of pork in these expenditures, and the people handling these bundled monies packages to Ukraine or wherever, they're going to take slices out. And I think this what we have right now is kind of a it's called regulatory capture, or it can be called a cabal. It's also kind of instrumentalism is another term, corporatism, and the F word people don't like is fascism, which is really an alignment of state and corporate interests. That is the essence of the fascia, which was the Roman. I mean, fascia actually started out as a nice thing. Fascia is just a bunch of wheat. It was given as a symbol of strength for the Roman. They have the SPQR, the Senate Pro Republica, I guess, the Senate for the people. And the idea was that the individual straws are the people, and you bind them together, and then you can kind of hold a blade on it because it's so strong together. So that's the original fascia. And in our ligaments and whatnot, we can have fasciitis, plantar fasciitis. So it's not a bad word, fascia per se. It just means a bundling together, and it gives strength. And I'm not sure who used it. I think Mussolini probably used it first, based on kind of rekindling the Roman ideal of the Roman Empire through his regime in the late 20s and early 30s, and that thus it was fascism. But it became a corporatism where one hand feeds the other. So that there would be favored companies, and then the government would deal with them, and conversely, those companies would help shuttle money to the right people within government. So it becomes a guild, kind of a closed network. And regulatory capture is a similar thing, but with a little bit of a delay in the feedback loop. So if you work, as Scott Gottlieb, I guess, features in your movie, if you work, was he at the FDA, I believe?
He was at the FDA, then Illumina, Pfizer,
Right.
and
And so then you wind up with a little bit of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. When you wind up, on the board of directors of Pfizer. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big, hard, tough, 9 to 11 p.m. kind of job. It's just something that you show up for, and you get this money, these sinecures for your wink, wink, nudge, nudge, great work beforehand. So the next person that comes along, the FDA, sees the Scott Gottlieb template, or thus like it. I'm not accusing him per se of malfeasance, but there is this template where you get the speaker fees, you get the book deals, you get all the positive things, and so you could produce your movie, and it could have a lot more integrity than something that Scott Gottlieb might say, or Dr. Fauci might produce in his book, The DNA of Caring. Oddly enough, that's his title. But he'll get a lot more money from it, even without necessarily people wanting to go out and run and buy this book, because institutions, libraries, offices, government will buy it. They'll get,
right.
kind of pulled and purchased by a lot of the same. It becomes a little bit of a turbo-charged, tornado-driven echo chamber. I'm making redundancies, kind of swirling upwards, and that's the whole magic of the whole thing. So the in-group does the in-group stuff, and the out-group stays out.
Yeah, it's. I'll tell you what. In order to use footage from networks and things like that, I had to do this under a nonprofit capacity, using a nonprofit organization that I have. And boy, when I mean nonprofit, I really do. No profit was made. But
well, you have to do it. You have to do it because you have to do it, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. I noticed your bravery, and I want to know how you get that, where we can shop for that. How can other people buy it or find it?
You can had to find bravery.
Well, yeah, or what gives you the kind of the power to have to do what you did and then push it through with, I don't know if you have the sense it might not make a fortune.
Look, I got to be honest. I mean, when I say there was a spiritual journey to this, there were events that occurred in my life that were statistically improbable, to the point where I started believing that maybe there was a higher power that was doing things, right? Like showing me that, okay, don't be afraid, just you have to do this. And I haven't talked about a lot of these publicly because I really don't want to distract from the factual information that I provide, right? Because when you deal with faith, you're not dealing necessarily with provable, referenceable information. You're talking about a spiritual belief that is beyond fact in many ways. And that's hard for people to get, but that's where I got, I would say, the bravery. If you're looking for a scientific formula, probably you need to inject a little bit of insanity into it, which I think all of us experienced in 2020. But also there really did seem to be like breadcrumbs were laid out in front of me of information so that I could digest little bits of it over time versus, learning the whole horrific thing that has occurred in the last 150 years, right? They're not, it's not just one particular story that I learned about that motivated me to do this. It's the culmination of all of them. And I'd like to say I'm brave, but I don't really feel brave. I feel like no one else was really doing it in this way, and if I didn't do it, no one else would. And I felt like I had a responsibility to the creator to do this. So that's what I did. Now, you can talk about Bible verses and things like that, but essentially in Ezekiel 33, it's the point is to say, like, if you see a bad thing coming, you have to warn the city leaders, and as long as you do that, their blood isn't on your hands if they choose not to listen. And I've said the thing, and if people choose not to listen to me, that's cool. I'm going to sleep okay. I'm going to sleep just fine because I did my job. I warned people, and if they don't want to listen, that's fine. Now, the curious part of that is censorship and the various forms of censorship that exist. People might want to see this movie, but they can't because maybe it's not showing up in search results or whatever else. But also, it's 2 hours long. It is a difficult watch. It reminds us all of a period of time that I think most people just want to forget. So, as a storyteller, it's my job to try to do this in a way that keeps people engaged. And, maybe I've failed a little bit at that. But considering, like I said, I did this basically out of a garage, I think I did okay with the tools that I had. But
No, I agree.
Interesting that I had this pedigree of experience where I could do both the creative and the technical by myself without a huge staff or anything helping me. I mean, there were definitely tons of people providing encouragement or interviews and things like that. But it was pretty much just a leap of faith in a way.
Yeah. So you have family, I believe I heard.
That, by the way, that's a huge component of it. When you have children, you suddenly now need to not only provide for today but for tomorrow, and you're looking ahead, and you try to help anticipate obstacles that your kids are going to experience in the future. And what I see in our future right now is not very good, and I don't see my children having the ability to be truly free in our current trajectory as a society.
Trajectory, that's a tough word.
Yeah.
I used to have trouble with the word judicious. I couldn't
yeah.
say it. I would just stumble. Judicious. But some of those words, they catch you.
The meningococcal, is that it?
Oh, that's a tough one, yeah. Now, medicine has a lot of those. I'm trying to think of some. But yeah, meningococcal's tough.
We've been dealing with that. Yeah, that we've been dealing with that word this week. I did an interview with Angela Wolbrecht about outside the FDA this week about the girl Alexis Lorenz, who had the massive hematomas after being given vaccines. She had PNH. She's been kind of a viral story this week, but she did get meningococcal vaccines. And
there's a lot of vaccines out there. I just can't really kind of wrap my mind about it. Again, I've written these articles on Dr. Fauci, and I've got a few other articles in Brownstone related. The concept of vaccine, without doing the etymology,
I never had a problem with vaccines.
No, I understand that. Well, there were fewer of them. When you were a kid, there were just far fewer vaccines. In 1986, I think there were. I graduated medical school in 1981. I started practicing, in the 80s, I did kind of a general primary care, and so I mostly saw adults, but I saw kids. And the vaccine schedule was such that you might have, 8 vaccines by the time you hit puberty. I think by the time you're 15 now, there's, I don't know, dozens. I think you're up to like 40 or 50 vaccines or something like that. So it's an incredible number. In 19, I mean, we just very briefly, people can look up the 1986 NCVIA, which basically indemnified vaccine producers, and they wanted to be able to have vaccines available, and people were suing for this and that. And they're like, oh, we're going to protect you if you make a vaccine. Well, fine. What happened, though, is that this opened the floodgates towards kind of a redirection from pharmaceutical companies towards vaccines, because they could make something and kind of be guaranteed. I'm going to use this word twice in one episode, a sinecure, kind of a guaranteed governmentally funded pipeline of money for which you don't have to, like a stipend, and you don't have to work as hard for it. And once they approve it for the panel of things that you have to get, well, it's like that's a sinecure. You've made money, and you're going to make money. It's like a license to make money forever. So it's better than a patent. It's better than a post office job. It's better than whatever. So you're good to go. So everything gets turned into a vaccine. So we have vaccines for everything now, and people are getting them at record numbers. The concept of vaccine originally is actually, vaca in Spanish is cow, and it refers to vaccinia refers to cowpox, and it was given when smallpox was a horrible, deadly illness and quite pervasive. Even George Washington's troops, they would find somebody with cowpox and kind of inject that, take a little piece of the cowpox, which is called vaccinia, and then put that in somebody else. So it was called a vaccine after that. Okay, fine, all well and good when you're kind of combating potential smallpox, which at the time could have up to like a 30% mortality rate. I think the mortality rate declined with better health conditions over time. But nonetheless, a bad illness. Unfortunately, it's gone from the face of the earth because of vaccines, which, are basically eponymous, with the same name as vaccinia. Fine. And then it kind of gets brought into other illnesses. And if they're bad enough illnesses, well, fine, all well, good. But the theme that pervades the entire history of vaccines is that you do it beforehand. This concept where we start giving them after the fact and call them boosters for illnesses that have already been kind of out in the world is ludicrous. And then, insofar as, we give flu shots, there is kind of a year by year a piece of the flu shot, which is generic to flu vaccines. But every year we put on a new license plate. We put a new, serial number that's coincident with that year's flu. So if it's going to be H1N5, we put an H1N5 antigen set of antigens in it. If it's H2, it's kind of like that one-armed bandit in Las Vegas. There's two rollers, H and N, and I forget that they go up to like 7 and 13, whatever. So it could be, an H6N12, whatever it happens to be that year. That's the one you get. But with COVID, we started giving it that original one, SARS-CoV-2, when it was alpha. When it was SARS-CoV-2, classic SARS-CoV-2. Then it was when it was alpha. Then it was beta. Then it was delta. They for some reason skipped over gamma. Whatever version, kappa, lambda. We kept giving SARS-CoV-2 classic code. And so there are all these new versions coming around. We kept giving the original one. And clearly it's gone from the face of the earth. After that first, 6, 8, 12 months and so forth, it's purposeless to give the outdated flu shot version of the vaccine. And they did not update it because they had the EUA, and it would have taken another process to get another one out. And so a lot of these things were kind of beholden to this kind of corporatist aspect where the government was blessing and winking or closing its eyes over the fact that the vaccine was out of date. If you went into the hospital and you had a bad enough case of COVID, you needed monoclonal antibodies, and you had the beta version of COVID, you would get beta monoclonal antibodies. You had the Delta version, you would get Delta. You wouldn't get classic SARS-CoV-2 antibodies because everyone knew they were out of date. They kept changing out the monoclonal antibodies, which are effectively just an instant version of vaccine. It's like vaccine after the fact. The antibodies that you produce yourself, you're going to inject them because people don't have time. So the kind of the hypocrisy of the whole episode, where we're giving this antiquated, outdated vaccine version, it kind of ruined vaccines for a large extent, in amongst the public trust in the world, because people, were getting bad effects from it. I think the side effect rate from the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines overall over those following subsequent 2 years is the worst of any vaccines, far worse than the flu shots, like an order of magnitude worse than any flu shot. anyway, sorry for the little diatribes, but these things kind of off piss me, I guess, a little bit. That all these basic tenets, because I like vaccines. I think they're okay to a point, but you have to have it for the right thing. If I'm not getting a yellow fever vaccine anytime soon because I have no plans of going to West Africa or wherever. But if I were, I'm very happy one exists. If I have to be, if my next job has to be trudging through, the Niger River or something like that, in the, in amongst the tropical whatever, and that's my job. I'm 25 years old. I'm going to be a forest ranger in West Africa. I want a yellow fever vaccine. Yes, please. Thank you very much. I want it, whatever the side effects are, because it's worth, it's better than getting yellow fever. But I wouldn't take it and I wouldn't give it to everybody on earth because there happens to be one. That's kind of the way we're trending for a lot of these vaccines. We're giving to everybody all the time. And this and independent of risk benefit. If you're a 5-year-old kid, you're getting a COVID vaccine. 5-year-olds don't get ill or die or have problems from COVID. So this kind of indiscriminate application, I think, reeks of stuff, of a bad scent, a bad stench, and it kind of I think it's polluted and it's not quite ruined, but ruined, damaged, and tarnished the reputation of medicine. I don't think I had a high opinion of bureaucrats to begin with, but when medicine went in bed with them, that's not a great thing.
I told the FDA CBER committee I had an exchange with one of their representatives after Janet Woodcock put me in touch with him, and I essentially said, you guys might want to consider funding my work. If anyone's going to take you seriously, the respect and that the practice of medicine has is at an all-time low, and you're going to need people like me to do the thing that you're not able to do, which is look for fraud, look for the corruption, because a conflict of interest exists just because it appears to be a conflict of interest, right? That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. But now we've convoluted the description now to be like, oh, well, it's only a conflict of interest if you've done, these 3 things in order, and you can't obfuscate away conflict of interest, I'm sorry to say, even though clearly they've tried.
No, it's why you have a judge. If I don't know, your car hits mine or vice versa, you and I can argue about it 18 different ways from Tuesday. And in the old days, we would have a vendetta. We have and worse than, let's say it's worse than that. Let's say God forbid somebody hits your kid, whatever. That would be an endless tribal vendetta. I would take one of your kids. You take one of my kids. I take 3 of your kids. You take 5 of my kids. It goes on and on. So the reason we have judges is to kind of take away the whole aspect that we can't see things rationally because, in the heat of the moment, because we are, we're animals. We have moods and so forth. And so to take away the, science and medicine have been, they've always had kind of this self-regulatory process, I guess, to a point. Where the right theories would bubble up. I can keep insisting that gravity goes up, but everything I drop goes the other way over and over again. Everyone's like, oh well, you're a moron. No one's going to follow you, and so you don't necessarily need peer review. It's kind of like just regular review that the right theories work their way up, and everyone kind of comes around. Even though, like when Einstein came up with the general relativity and maybe space time is bent or whatever, people are like, yeah, I don't think so. But then he's like, well, look at the sun over the eclipse and the star, whatever. It should be here. It's there. Okay, fine. So people kind of come around to it. But when they cloud a lot of the data that's coming along, eventually the truth has to come out. Don't get me wrong. Eventually the truth comes out. But in the moment, they are not acting judiciously or judiciously. They are acting meretriciously. They're acting kind of in their own interest, and they've kind of pissed in the pool and they're reveling in it. They have changed metaphors. They put the finger on the scale, and it's just not a good look, and it's a sadness overall. And at some point there might need to be kind of an arbitration. When we watch, I kind of like sports. Watching sports, it's a relief from all the havoc in the world and the anger and whatnot, because at the end of the day, you go into instant replay, you see the thing, you watch the catch 5 times, like, oh, it was a catch. They go through this whole review process. This somehow you can do it for a football game, and you can watch the guy 2 toes in caught the ball, kept it through contact, blah, blah. Oh, it's a touchdown. Okay, fine. They're right like 98% of the time. Science doesn't do that, and they've convoluted it and confabulated and condemned themselves by false convictions, and it's just it's a sadness, because I think they're kind of frittering away so much decades if not centuries of public trust over the matter for what? I don't know. I mean, to keep their little kind of toady bureaucratic jobs, to kind of stay in the institution, to be the nail that doesn't stick out.
I've done a lot of FOIA requests. I've dealt with a lot of different government agencies, both large and small. And one thing I kind of find consistently is that none of them wants attention. They don't want to be questioned for their actions. So you'll see agencies just not respond to emails. You'll see, and what's funny is, like, I've done a FOIA request about myself to an agency to see what they said about me when I wasn't on the thread, and I see them say, he's a journalist, I'm scared, I don't want to respond. That was my inauguration, actually, into doing these FOIA requests. Was discovering that and going, oh, well, I mean, and I guess, like, I get it, like, nobody wants to be called out, but at the same time, if you're doing the right thing, you don't have to worry, right? But that's where we're at now. We're in a situation where there's all kinds of different ways that you can have influence on people, and especially when you get into the level of doctors and lawyers and politicians and whatever. You can pay someone directly with money. That's definitely an easy route to corrupt their soul. But you can also get them with pride, hubris, ego, status. Look at Varma, the New York City doctor that was telling everybody to stay home and pushing mandates and things like that, while he was out having drug-fueled orgies. I can't write this. This is crazy. Do as I say, not as I do, and there are different rules for me than for you. This is the world that we live in. This is the new world order. These high status individuals can have a completely different life than you or I, and we're all seeing it in terms of, like, corrupt court cases, the judiciary. It's craziness. And that guy's on the Council for Foreign Relations, by the way.
Oh, of course he is, and why wouldn't he be? Back a couple of years, was it maybe a year ago? I wrote an article, again, also in Brownstone, on Donald McNeil, and he wound up getting defrocked from the New York Times over something completely different. It's one of these woke things, but for a long time, he was the chief science writer. He's not a scientist; he's a rhetorician from Berkeley, so he's good at talking and maybe thinking. But he's kind of the lead science guy, and he did this little, circular megaphone drill with Dr. Fauci and Tom Frieden. Tom Frieden had come up through New York City health apparatus, just like Jay Varma, and then he wound up at the CDC, and he had a peccadillo, which is a great word, because it sort of reminds me of what he actually did. He was sexually frisky, I guess, with his wife's friend. Anyway, so he copped to a misdemeanor, and that should be the end of your medical career or your bureaucratic career. But lo and behold, he's got a $500,000 job at it's a foundation you've never heard of. It has to do with heart disease. I can come up with it anyway. But probably for, as thanks for, a good career, well done, because he's funded this foundation. He's getting $500,000 for per annum is funded by Bloomberg, Gates, and Zuckerberg. And so, that's $500,000, whatever. It's nothing for them, but it's like, keep your friends close, your enemies closer, and your friends who've had misdemeanors, keep them, give them jobs. And it's part of this thing where no offense, but if you or I had that type of issue, we pled misdemeanor to a sexual crime, so we're technically on the sexual whatever the thing, what's that roster called?
Child
Sexual
predator or
predator,
sex
whatever it is.
predator, yeah.
Where you can't live near a school, blah blah. I would not be getting a $500,000 job for like doing close to nothing at a foundation. So, kind of circling back to the Donald McNeil, Jay Varma, New York City aspect, so much of what happened during COVID happened through the lens of New York City. And Donald McNeil was the chief megaphonist for the, concept of going medieval on the virus, which he got from Dr. Fauci. Now, going medieval on a virus is not a public health rationale. That's actually medieval. What they did with medieval age is when they thought the Jews were kind of the agents for the Black Plague, is they rounded up the Jews, put them in a church or a synagogue, and lit the synagogue on fire. That's going medieval on a potential, viral, in this case, bubonic plague, bacterial conduit. So going bacterial on an illness is not really the right way of doing things. That was literally the I don't know if it's front page, but that was the top news in the New York Times, and that helped bring the hysteria that people had over COVID landfall. And so SIGA, SIGA, SIGA Tech is the company that had recently fired Jay Varma. SIGA Tech is involved with monkeypox.
Yeah, I saw
and they
that.
have this TPOXX thing, TPOXX, which is medication, but they're also working on a monkeypox vaccine. Getting kind of circles back the whole thing because it's actually related to vaccinia. So it's actually kind of the essential vaccine if we want to do a little history roundabout. But SIGA, has money involved, kind of money in the fray right now because monkeypox is the forefront of this vaccine thing. Kind of the exaggerated epidemic model of making money. The easiest way to make money these days is, again, get a kind of a sinecure for your treatment or vaccine from the government. So the government has like $113 million contract for TPOXX, and they are also working on a contract for a monkeypox vaccine. Now, there might be some benefit because maybe smallpox comes back or whatever, but the fact that Jay Varma was able to get his job there right from New York City is, again, I think part of this kind of general, regulatory capture, because they didn't hire him for character,
Right.
clearly. And again, I can maybe come up with the name of the foundation. Again, that foundation didn't hire Tom Frieden for character. And Donald McNeil, once he got defrocked from, disbarred from the New York Times, he started writing endlessly on monkeypox. I think I can't, intuit his motives, but I think there's the same kind of thing. It's like there's money there. Willie Sutton would ask why he robs banks, and it's like, well, that's where the money is. I think a lot of these actors, gravitate towards this vaccine world. SIGA is a creature of, he's invented by the investor Ronald Perelman, billionaire at times. There's money there, and that's why people are doing it. They're kind of circling around these things because it's not just money, but it's easy money. It's easy money on a reproducible, factor forever.
So you had Asper under Robert Cadlick and Rick Bright. I mentioned them in the movie a little bit. Rick Bright was the head of BARDA, Biological Advanced Research Development Agency. When Rick Bright decided to go become a whistleblower, aka when he was about to get fired, and he was leaking to the press, part of his leak was a hit piece against Robert Cadlick, who I'm not saying is a saint. He actually is involved in the smallpox vaccine. Robert Cadlick had been called out for not disclosing that he was a consultant to Emergent Biosolutions, the maker of smallpox vaccines, right? Which I believe is the monkeypox vaccine is actually also a smallpox vaccine,
Yes.
right?
Well, they're
Yeah.
all in that same variola branch, but
So anyway, you've got now everybody's happy with Emergent Biosolutions. What happened? It was only used as a weapon to hurt Robert Cadlick because Robert was Rick Bright's boss. So this is really kind of what I try to do. I don't know if I do it as well as I could, is to show that politics is merely a weapon to get what pharmaceutical companies want. For example, everyone hated hydroxychloroquine because Donald Trump supported it. And the news made sure that you always thought that Donald Trump and hydroxychloroquine had an affair, and like that was their baby, right? So everybody hated it because Donald Trump liked it. There was no correlation pointed out between Donald Trump and remdesivir. One cost $3,000 a pop. The other was about a half a cent a pill. So it's interesting that Donald Trump was not associated with remdesivir, even though he publicly supported it just as much as, not quite as much as he did hydroxychloroquine. But he touted it. It was a success that he did, that we got all these doses of remdesivir, which ultimately, at the end of the day, appears to have contributed significantly to, and I say appears because, I'm not the doctor, but I've interviewed and dealt with enough people who suffered from what they call hospital homicides to say that there should have been more investigation into remdesivir. I mean, it seems like it was pulled from Ebola trials because it was making Ebola more deadly. And then immediately they turn around and assign it to COVID, which is insane. So that's a bigger issue. The point is, you can pick and choose which association you want depending on what's the more profitable outcome, and that's what the media does. And that's why I think we really have to discontinue pharmaceutical advertising on broadcast media. Maybe all pharma advertising completely, because there are only two countries that do it. It's us and New Zealand. That's it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I don't like the sound of that, but because I think it bleeds out into other things. I think they can make their case.
We don't let cigarettes make ads anymore.
No, yeah, I understand that.
And you got to consider,
I'll have to ponder that one.
The pharmaceutical companies use these ads as a method of getting, due diligence to physicians.
Right. The money would be there anyway. It used to be, that they would have pharmaceutical dinners and junkets and whatnot for physicians. So I know it's out there. Ted Kennedy, the quote unquote lion of the Senate, they spelt it Lion. Well, that could very well be, a different word, lying. He would take all kinds of donations from whomever, $1,000 a plate dinners on his behalf and whatnot. But doctors were, they were persuadable by, going out to Capitol Grill or something like that. Well, maybe they were, but so too is the Senate. It's a tough one because money's always going to be there. There's always going to be somebody, wanting to get something. Our founders didn't think that people were great. And they didn't make a government for perfect people. They made a government for imperfect people who keep getting, produced and reproduced. And so the idea is to have adequate checks and balances in place and so forth. And, when you have a large enough bureaucracy, I think the problem is innately within the bureaucracy, that there's so much kind of power for the agencies. So the disrupting of the Chevron doctrine, which was actually put in place for a total opposite intent for the way it was used. It's a long story there, but in the 1980s, I don't get to it, but basically it was there because, well, leave it aside. It wound up getting conflated and reversed into making the bureaucracy do whatever it wanted and allowing bureaucracy to make laws. Now that that's been reversed, we have the chance of getting at this in a better way. I don't really want to limit free speech, whether it's from pharmaceutical companies or from non. So for the pharmaceutical companies do good things. I take a certain number of pills. I have gouty arthritis, and I thank that there's enough allopurinol out there so I don't get attacks. And there's going to be something down the line. I'm sure I'm going to be happy for some medication. I don't make that stuff. It's like going against big oil. I have people against big oil except when they want to fill up their tank. These things are services, and they are led by people, and people are corruptible. The idea is to have everything kind of open enough so they shy away from doing that stuff. And I think Pfizer could be managed in that way, but clearly having the bureaucrats have so much, magic wand abilities to, kind of change the way the studies are. There's a fair amount of cabal aspect to the way that peer review is done, the way medicine's done. I think all these things have to be inverted. It has to be a little bit more like the the blockchain Bitcoin model, where people get to kind of put their bets on certain things. Fantasy football, and we talked about sports a little. I did a little earlier. Fantasy football is a very, very interesting market. So the actual good players, they have higher value over time. You could easily have fantasy football science, okay? And people do studies, and they have them out there, and they're adjudicated. People put bets on them. It could be easily a secondary stock market kind of aspect, so that you put crap out, and then you get crap back. You put good stuff out, you get good stuff back. And so I think the kind of inverting or the reverting of the system to more open would benefit all parties. Because what we have now is we have a lot of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, and so the pharmaceutical companies, they can shade their studies a certain way. That won't last forever. Theranos didn't last forever. Everything becomes a bubble, and so if you want to avoid the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos bubble, you have to be attentive, and you won't get the money in the first place, and you can prove it along the way. So the reason Theranos happened is because she was able to hide her data. And people just went into her deep voice kind of routine and just bought into it. And they buy into myth, and that's fine. And screw them when they drop out. Sam Bankman-Fried, all this kind of stuff. It all ends. Every Ponzi scheme ends, and the Pfizer Ponzi scheme will end. The vaccines Ponzi scheme will end. The question is how and when and by which means. And it has to be through openness, because I don't think even the people on quote unquote my side are not necessarily better people per se, but they're not part of the power structure. I think some people would be corruptible regardless, Yeah. And the real question is you have to get a whole bunch of people, all of whom are corruptible, to have enough of the corruption dollar mush, so it factors away, it bleeds out. There's loads of betting on the NFL. Okay, there are a lot of bad people betting on the NFL, but it doesn't necessarily sway the game because they're betting on both sides, and the winner has to win. There has to be a winner ultimately, and it gets adjudicated. If the NFL model could be applied to science and a little bit of blockchain technology, you'd have a big plus. So I think the things that have to be gotten rid of are kind of the peer review aspect, the closeted media, and ditto for all the kind of silos of bureaucracy within science, medicine, bureaucracy itself, blah, blah, blah. There's a solution.
So I will say that I spent most of my career working in ad sales and marketing. So a lot of the work that I did would be tie-ins with like a big advertiser and a show or like a movie for a studio and a television show. So one thing we always sort of knew and this I think was even what they told me, ad sales rules the roost. And when you have a news organization that gets ad sale money from Pfizer, dude, they ain't gonna investigate Pfizer for sure. I mean, because you're looking like if you get $1 billion a year from Pfizer or from even all pharmaceutical companies, and you are say CNN, that $1 billion is huge for a number of reasons, but the biggest one is having experienced multiple rounds of layoffs through these organizations over the last 20 years. Your friends aren't going to get fired this year.
Right.
These are the people that you work with every day. You love them. Like, you have affairs with them. Like, you go to parties with them on Friday night. You go to orgies with Varma on Saturday night. You know what I mean? Like, these are all your...
I have to unhear that.
That face. Anyway, when you... it's like a whole scene. Like, hey, what are you doing Saturday?
Yeah,
I got a hotel room. We're gonna grab some Molly and
I forget it was David Berg or Cat Turd on X who said, I think the sign that when Sean Combs Puff Daddy was going bad was when he renamed himself to P Diddy. It's like,
and you know what, and also speaking of P Diddy, I just want to say, looking through all the stuff, if as a physician. Anything that you do that requires more than 200 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, that's not good for you. So it's my professional physician recommendation that you stay under 200 bottles of lubricant. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see what the baby oil cartels say. I never want to buy baby oil again.
It's a
after hearing
sadness.
that.
The whole it's so much is sad, and it's it's depraved, and I don't know if it's emblematic or endemic or part and parcel of lying, but once you lie, you ruin yourself.
You've impeached yourself. It's an actual it's a legal thing. If a witness impeaches himself on the stand or lies and perjures himself, they've impeached all of their integrity, and pretty much all of their testimony has to be questioned.
No, I understand that. I'm talking more on a personal basis. I think when you head down a pathway of materialism, say, so that shiny object is worth more than your sense of truth, it just multiplies. You seem to keep doubling down. It's never enough. I think it's a little bit like the addiction pathway. That first dose makes you feel good. You got your pleasure, not the old-fashioned way through hard work or intimacy or somebody commending you, but you got it, kind of more in a masturbatory way. You injected it, say. If you can inject pleasure, which is what heroin is, it's kind of injected endorphins. Mm-hmm. The name's the same. Then you kind of have to keep getting more of it that way, and you get it further and further. You kind of take that, your roads diverge, and you wind up needing to get the pleasure in this kind of false, artificial way. And there you have Hollywood. It's kind of you see it over and over again, kind of the Britney Spears or Miley Cyrus pathway, or maybe Justin Bieber, where they start out wholesome, and then something happens. Hollywood. Right. I grew up, watching movies and whatnot, and but there's something, amiss. There's something wrong there, and it is a sadness the way kind of things devolve. And anyway, it brings you back to the aspect of I think kind of comes full circle to why you made this movie. And as we're kind of a little bit over the hour. And I apologize for having spoken too much, but a lot of what you had in the movie and in general, it aligns with some of my work over the last few years, and B, I guess, brought out a little bit of possibly righteous anger at the way things have happened in medicine.
It's trauma. We're working through it.
It was a tough couple of years there.
Yeah.
I had myself not quite spat at. But I had people scream at me for saying what I would completely defend over and over again. I belonged to a little, sports club, a couple of them actually. And I was sitting in kind of the living room area watching somebody else play squash. A mother was watching her daughter play squash, and the kid was going to get a vaccine. She'd already had the illness. And I was not giving medical advice per se. I was just saying that, she should talk with her own pediatrician, but, the data shows that kids don't really get that sick, and blah, blah, blah. I've had the illness. And I said what I said before. It's like we've never really given vaccines after the fact, and if you've had an illness, we particularly don't give it after the fact. And I've got my little Dr. Fauci voice again, if you can bear with me. But
that's actually why I'm here. Is your Fauci
I know, it's so good. I really should be on tour. There's a whole bunch of Kamala impersonators and Trump impersonators, and I maybe the demand's not there for a Dr. Fauci impersonator. But 2005, he was on C-SPAN or something. It's on C-SPAN now. I'm not sure what channel it was, but he's on a talk show. Somebody calls in and says, "I just got the whatever this year's flu is. Should I get the flu shot anyway?" He's like, "No, you should never get the flu shot after the illness, because the illness is the entire virus. So your body has seen every bit of it. The flu shot is just one antigen. Yeah. There's no reason to do this." Is kind of like overkill. His point. And I've got where I got lost with the impersonation, but this kind of stuff doesn't really work well for medicine. Going back on your basic tenets and why people did that. I mean, I think Dr. Fauci, and again, my 2 articles on him kind of delineate his reasons. I don't think he's demented. I don't think he forgot feeling strongly about X, Y, and Z. I don't think he forgot that he was funding the Wuhan lab. I don't think he forgot that the WIV was studying coronavirus and the bat lady. I don't think he forgot any of that stuff. I think he did it, to cover his own butt and to kind of promote a new self. And when people go, anyway, kind of get back to my point, when people start going down that road, there's no turning back. And the only thing you can do really is double down and double down and double down and double down. That's the nature of kind of this heroin addiction thing, where people keep getting, have to dip further in to get that same kind of level of pleasure. And when you start lying, you got to keep lying.
Right. I think it was Mao Zedong that said, I prefer to work with rightists because they'll tell you the truth, but leftists will say the opposite of what they mean.
Yeah, that little puzzle? There's a math puzzle, logic puzzle. It's like go to an island where they look identical, but half the population only always lies, and the other half only always tells the truth. And you have to figure out how to get to the main city. You have to frame the question, but it's a meta type question. I'll leave that out there for our listeners. It's a puzzle, but there is an answer to it. But that's kind of the way things are. You have to kind of frame things in such a way that the liar has to condemn, kind of like point out his own lie. So I want to, let people find you on X and on your Substack and find the movie. So I put that up a little bit ago.
Great.
Let's see if I can find it again. So here is the movie, and I think this will be good enough. John Davidson film, easy to spell and say. An Epidemic of Fraud, no hard words there. I did watch it. I think it was great. There's a lot to commend it. And there's a lot of excerpts. You have other venues for it. And let's see, what else? And then we have your Substack also. Let's see if I can find it fast enough.
It's brokentruth.tv.
There you go. Okay. So
or you can go to brokentruth.com and see sort of our old site, but it still links to the brokentruth.tv articles. So
perfect.
And yeah, this has been it's been an interesting ride. I've met a lot of great doctors like you, and that's heartening for me because that's, I think a lot of you guys really went through a soul-crushing experience with 2020 and COVID. And a lot of what I say in the film seems to resonate more with doctors and lawyers than the average people. But maybe that's who I was really making it for, The average person really doesn't want to see this. It's heartbreaking. And if you lost a loved one in a hospital due to, protocols or whatever, I mean, we're trying to restore integrity to these entities. And that's a really difficult thing because it requires honesty and it requires sort of being naked in public. And people don't like that. Everything is PR based now. It's propaganda. It's not truth. But if we don't do that, we're going to get much worse.
Yep.
So
I agree.
Yeah.
So I'm going to round things out. I just do want to put closure onto my Fauci quote there. I got lost in that, but I was saying I was in my squash and tennis club, and I gave that advice to the mom. I said, follow up with your own doctor, of course, but this is just my caveats because, that's what I think about with young people. Well, that's the right thing is the risk benefit, blah, blah, blah. And so this guy whom I'd never met really, I'd seen him once or twice. He's got an MD and an MPH, Master of Public Health. I found out later. He comes in and screams at me that I'm going to be, just one bad word after another about harming people. And I've had so that kind of level of vituperation is not good. I had to take him aside into another room because he's screaming so loud. And people think they had the right to do that. Even if he were correct, which he wasn't, dude, whatever happened to civility and so forth. It was a very strange thing. So I asked him to write everything down and put it into an email, rather than screaming at me. And he did. We exchanged a couple of, emails that tailed off when he didn't have any kind of, validity to back what he had going. But it was just, I've got, probably dozens of episodes like that, where if you kind of stood by, your divination of the truth, you were cast aside. It's a sadness. Anyway, so if people want to help support my podcast. I've got a book, as you mentioned. It's on the previous pandemic, which if people had heeded my words back then, I didn't. I wrote an article. It wasn't a book yet. I wrote an article in 2019 on the kind of the mirage of the Zika microcephaly pandemic. It had been a big deal in 2015-16 during the Rio Olympics, and the concept that a kind of a dengue variant, Zika, could cause microcephaly in babies when dengue never had, and none of the flaviviruses, including hepatitis C, whatnot, ever had either. It was a kind of a strange moment in medical history, and Dr. Fauci was one of the characters there. WHO, CDC, blah blah blah. We spent money on it as a whole research industry, and it disappeared completely. Thank you. I was very thankful. People should be so overwhelmingly happy about it and feeling blessed and so forth. And nobody has investigated why it disappeared, except for me. And so anyway, that's this book
That's
here.
good information.
Overcoming Zika, the pandemic that never was. You can buy it. It's a reasonable price, and it's even better if you read it. It's even better if you buy it and read it and review it favorably. So thank you so much, John, for being on.
Thank you, Dr. Bond.
I'd love to have you on again, maybe let you talk a little bit.
This was your therapy and your opportunity to share your accent or your impersonation. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And I do recommend everyone go to the Shock of Truth, Epidemic of Fraud, and find you on X and elsewhere, Substack.
Thank you. Broken Truth TV on X.
Bingo. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.